Almost 2 days have passed after the nerfs and buffs came live, so in this video we will look at some of the stats we have already on hsreplay.net, so we can better understand what you should be playing with and what you should be expecting against you on ladder. If you find the video helpful and you're serious about Hearthstone, definitely consider subscribing to the channel, and also don't forget you can hire me for some Hearthstone coaching. Now let's check out the decks.
You are not prepared!
So far we don't actually have the deck section already updated, but when you switch over to meta, you can check out what's happening for the last 1 day, which is a solid stat line to see some of the better performing decks so far. Right now for the last 1 day, we have Kris Imp Warlock at the top, and this was actually the only deck in tier 1 a few hours ago in Legend Top 1000, so that's probably meaning it's pretty good time to be playing Kris Imp Warlock. We can also see Aggro Mage being very high, as well as Pure Paladin, and Evolve Shaman didn't really get touched, so it also remains a pretty solid deck, and it might even be tier 1 right now. Some faster decks are also pretty nice, like Aggro Druid. Unholy Death Knight also received a lot of buffs, so that might be a pretty good thing to consider. Control Shaman ain't too bad. Frost Death Knight is actually still playable, gonna have to give that a bit more time though. And same can be said for Spell Demon Hunter, but probably without the quest. Miracle Rogue is still shown in here, and I did see a bunch of them running without Maestro anymore, obviously, and it's still actually a force to be reckoned with. And also Beast Hunter is out there in top 1000, even though the stats are not as amazing. When you switch over to Diamond through Legend though, you can see that Beast Hunter becomes a lot more playable, and since most of you are actually from Diamond to Legend, this might still be a pretty good pickup for you, as well as Big Spell Mage. We can also see Silverhand Paladin doing okay on these ranks, and Rage Warrior is also doable now, and Shock Spitter is also still very playable if you ask me. Anyway, let's go over the decks in a little bit more detail, starting off with Kris Imp Warlock, which basically remains the absolutely same list we used to been running before the new set came out, so it's still very good. You guys probably already know what you're supposed to be doing with this deck. I've gave you plenty of guides and plenty of coaching sessions with it too, but basically in the first turns you're trying to curve out nicely with your aggro imps, and then around turn 5 and 6, if the board is starting to get lost, you're trying to transition to a more control-y style with Abyssal Waves, as well as doubled out Lady Darkvein like that, maybe with the help of Bran, and basically shuffle a bunch of curses in the opponent. As long as the opponent doesn't try to keep a very big hand size against you, you should have no problem finishing them off with the curses, but if they still try to be keeping a big hand size, you're gonna have to persuade them into reducing it by giving them more problems on the board. And usually that's enough to take the win. Matchup wise, this is a very populated list, but the stats are pretty messy from before, so keep that in mind. But you can get a good idea of what you should be expecting. Frost Death Knight did get nerfed, and that was one of the bad matchups, but you should be okay now. Aggro Demon Hunter is something that might actually take a rise in power once again, but the rest probably not so much. Aggro Druid, we actually saw it performing pretty well right now, so that might be trouble. Even though, honestly, against Aggro Druid you do definitely have a lot of control-y tools, so I don't think it should be that big a problem. Aggro Mage, however, might be on the problematic side, and also Evolve Shaman. Shock Spitter got nerfed, so that shouldn't be too popular now, even though you're still gonna see a bunch of them. And Miracle Rogue is still playable, but you shouldn't be seeing as much of those either. And Rage Warrior, however, looks kinda problematic, but again, it is yet to be determined if it's actually gonna be a real meta deck. Mulligan wise, going first and second, you're always gonna want your Wicked Shipment, your Fiendish Circle, your Flustered Librarian. Flame Imp also usually always makes the cut. And if you already have some of those, you can start thinking about things like Vile Library, Impending Catastrophe, and also Mischievous Imp can be a pretty good keep most of the time. When going first, you want to have at least a good Wicked Shipment, or at least a couple of good 1-drops like Flame Imp and Fluster Librarian or something. Imp King Rafal might also make the cut, but again, try to be curving into it. And even Cultist is not the worst thing in the world if you already have a good curve going. When going second, however, you can be a lot more liberal with some of the keeps. But again, it's basically the same cards you should be keeping, but you could keep things like Mischievous Imp or even Imp King Rafam even without having already a good curve. Against some matchups at least, like if you're expecting big board clears against you, Imp King Rafam's probably not gonna be that amazing for you anyway. You could also consider some removal when going second, however, cause if you are, let's say, against an Aggro Druid, keeping a Grimoire Sacrifice might be the difference between life and death then. And even things like Touch of Nafrazim or Drag Below could be considered a decent keep, depending on the matchup though. On the number 2 spot we have Aggro Mage doing pretty well, and you should probably already be familiar with this list too. We're not seeing any of the new buffed cards in here, but they don't exactly fit the style of the deck anyway, so it's not that big a deal. You have a bunch of good 1-drops in here, Astalor is still a part of it, and I believe it should basically remain a part of any deck that used to run him, cause it's just too good still. We have Crooked Cook for some extra card draw, Frozen Touch so you can cycle a lot of damage, Prismatic Elemental can give you some pretty high rolly stuff. Frostweaver always draws you a frost spell, cause that's all you're running. Cold Case is pretty nice for some extra survivability, but also a bunch of skeletons so you can get a bigger Deathborn. Commander Sivara gives you your stuff back, and also Egwin for that extra bit of damage. Let's not forget you're also getting Arcane Bolts out of these guys, so that can be a ton of damage after turn 8. But you're no stranger to popping off with those even earlier, so keep that in mind. Matchup wise, here's what it looks like, and you're not gonna be a big fan of control decks like Control Paladin and Dragon Paladin. Big Spell Mage might also be a problem for you because they're gonna swap out your spell costs. And again, Enraged Warrior might be a problem too, but the rest looks pretty good. Mulligan wise, here's what the stats look like. You want to be having a good 1-drop, Frostweaver the Engineer always makes a lot of sense, Amplified Snow Flurry can be crazy good, Cold Case if you're already curving into it, and even Egwin if you already have a decent curve going too. When on the coin, however, this is what it looks like, and again it looks pretty similar honestly, but I guess Frozen Touch also could make the cut here. And even things like Deathborn are pretty high on the keep list, but I guess you still need to be curving out well into it. On the number 3 spot we have Pure Paladin, and this deck was already pretty decent from Diamond to Legend, but right now it's actually even pretty usable in Top Legend, so that's pretty good for it. The deck is pretty aggressive and pretty straightforward. You have a lot of sticky minions with Divine Shields, a lot of good buffs, and a lot of good synergies with your Blood Matriarch Liadrin, as well as your Katori Lightblade. Order in the Court gives you a pretty good curve, because usually once you play it, your Light Rays are already down to 0, and you're drawing one of them instantly, and the other one right next after it, and after that you get your Countess for some spicy free legendaries. You gotta be careful how fast you play Order in the Court, however, because you don't want to be bricking your top decks with your most expensive cards super early. Matchup wise we don't have as much stats here, but Frost Death Knight is gonna be a pretty bad one for you. From Diamond to Legend here's what it looks like, and Imp Warlock is gonna be a little bit on the iffy side, as well as Aggro Mage. For the Mulligan, here's what it looks like. Basically, you want to have a pretty nice curve with your good 1-drops with Divine Shield. Seafloor Savior round 2 can be pretty good as well. Sinful Chef also makes a lot of sense, especially if you have your Alliance Bannerman, so you can buff up those dudes. Class Action Lawyer could be a pretty nice curve play still, and don't overvalue it, like setting a minion at 1-1 is cool and all, but usually you just want to be tempoing out, unless you're expecting some really big stuff, like against the Miracle Rogue, sure hold on to it. Even the Countess can make enough sense to be a keep, and also Righteous Protector. Honestly, I would also consider keeping Knight at the Anointment, and also Stoneheart Vindicator in certain cases. And depending on the matchup, you might even consider things like Blood Matriarch as well as Katori Lightblade, but it really comes down to the matchup. Like, if they can't deal with this on curve, you might just tempo it, and after that the game becomes very easy. When on the coin, however, here's what it looks like, and we have a very drastic change. Like, Blood Matriarch was all the way down here where Katori was, but now she becomes the best keep. Soldier is still pretty nice. Light Ray, I'm not sure why this is so high on the keep list here, like that sounds just wrong, but the rest is pretty much the same. On the number 4 spot, Evolve Shaman is pretty strong still, and it has some serious high roll potentials. This variant is running Shadowhunter Vol'jin as well as Neptulon, but you can actually use Shadowhunter Vol'jin to try and break the opponent's combos as well, but obviously getting a turn 5 Neptulon can also be insanely high rolly. And same can be said for Glug on 5 as well. You also have a couple of Bloodlusts in here, which come in pretty handy given the fact you have a lot of ways to fill the board with small meaningless stuff, and if the opponent doesn't have a way to respect it, Bloodlust can close the game right then and there. We also obviously have the Goldshire Gnolls, which could become Deathwing as soon as turn 3 if you're on the coin even, and we also have Tiny Toys, which you can evolve into 7-drops with the help of your infused Convincing Disguise. Brucon is also pretty helpful, with some extra reach and healing, and yeah, the rest is basically standard Evolve Shaman. On the matchup section, Aggro Druid is gonna be a bit too fast for you, and also rogues are not your friends most of the time, but everything else is 50 or far from it in a positive manner. For the mulligan, when going first, schooling is always a great keep, and same can be said for pre-science. The carving chisel is also pretty nice. Convincing disguise, it's not bad to start infusing it, but I would not just straight up keep it without having anything else good. Wildpaw Caverns, however, is pretty nice. Neptulon could be an interesting consideration of a keep, especially if you already have Shadowhunter Vol'jin, but that could also be quite baity, because if you wait till turn 5 just to do that, you might be a little bit too behind on the board, but Neptulon should be able to save you back. Muck Pools is always a keep as well. Farsight, I wouldn't say is an amazing keep, but also it could give you some pretty nice high rolls for a great turn 4. When going first, Goldshire Gnoll is something you're not going to be keeping actually, but when going second, that's one of your best keeps. Especially if you already have the schooling. Going second gives you an extra coin as well as an extra card, so that's amazing for the Goldshire Gnoll right there. And if you also have Mugpool with it, that can be very, very good. Like the dream hand with this going second would be schooling, Goldshire Gnoll, and Mugpools. And that is a turn 3 rush plus guaranteed 8/8 or above. The other keeps look pretty similar though. And on the last spot, we still have Beast Hunter doing fairly well, from Diamond to Legend at least, and the list looks pretty similar to what the old Beast Hunter looked like back in the day. This is still a 40 variant, but instead of the Nefrius, now you're running collateral damage, which can be insane amounts of reach. We also have Arelon in here, as well as Huntsman Altimore, and those can be pretty chunky. We have 2 pet collectors and only 1 Acheron Saber, so this makes your pet collectors very consistent as long as you do have a beast still in the deck. We have a couple of Harpoon Guns so you can try to high roll with some of your fat beasts, and you have Wing Commander at the end, so you can summon out all of those big beasts, including King Crush. Matchup wise right now, Imp Warlock and Pure Paladin would be your biggest contenders, and also Aggro Mage is a little bit under 50, but everything else looks good. For the mulligan, going first, here's what it looks like. Basically you're trying to curve out well. When going first, Trog is pretty nice as well as the Peasant. Spirit Poacher and Wild Spirits are always great. Beastalker Tavish is also always amazing. Sylvanas, I wouldn't really be keeping her straight up like that. I have to have a very good hand already, even to start considering something like her, but if you have her fully infused, it could be quite the big swing on turn 6. K9 is always great on curve, and if you're already curving Pet Collector also makes sense. I would also always keep Harpoon Gun, I have no idea why this is this low, and if you already have a good 1-drop, a Doggy Biscuit also makes a lot of sense. And even Ramming Mount might be a keep instead of the Doggy, but be careful with that one. When on the coin, here's what it looks like, and again it's pretty similar, but also things like Arelon become a lot more keepable, and Hydrolodon can be a pretty good curve play as well. Blade Master Okani can also be pretty nice. So that's gonna be it for this meta report, guys. Hope this helps you figure out what you wanna be playing in the first few days after the patch came out. Definitely try not to craft too much still, because the meta is yet to settle, but still, if you have these decks, definitely give them a go. Thanks for watching, I'm Kris05, and I'll see you in my next video, or stream.